What we're looking at here is a drone aircraft carrier developed by the Ukrainian Navy. This technology combines seaborne drones and kamikaze FPV drones into a potent and completely new kind of weapon. Since it first appeared in late 2024, Ukraine has used it to attack Russian oil rigs, radar stations, anti-air batteries, ships, and even a helicopter. It is just the latest groundbreaking development for drones in a war that is increasingly being driven by remote control technology. So how does this new weapon work? Can Russia do anything to stop it? And what are the implications for other countries and their militaries? We're going to examine the tapes, get underneath the shell of these novel aircraft carriers, and speak to an expert to find out. This is the Ukrainian drone carrier. We don't yet know its name, but we do know some of its key features. The body of the carrier is an uncrewed surface vehicle, or USV, similar to the Sea Baby drone that is used by Ukrainian special forces. At the bow of the ship are 3 impact fuses designed to detonate when they make contact with a target. This means that hidden somewhere in the front of the boat is a large amount of explosives, allowing it to carry out kamikaze attacks just like the Sea Baby. Just behind that is an FLIR camera. This can spin side to side, tilt up and down, and allows the drone's controller to guide the vessel to its target. The camera has thermal imaging, which allows the controller to see at night when most of the missions take place. And it is gyroscopically stabilized, meaning the video doesn't jump up and down every time the drone hits a wave. At the back of the vessel is some kind of hangar. We don't know for sure, but we think this contains sea mines, depth charges, or some other kind of explosives. The drone can drop these into the water, laying a trap for other boats to run into, or blowing up stationary targets like oil rigs. Just in front of that hangar is a large mast. We think this is a signal relay that allows the drones the boat launches to communicate with their controllers. Then in the middle of the vessel is its pièce de résistance, a hangar with room to hold 4 FPV drones. This appears to be covered over, so the drones are protected during transport before opening up when it approaches its target. The FPV drones can then launch. Once the FPVs are in the air, their controllers take over and guide them to their targets, such as radar stations or anti-air launchers. Then the Sea Drone pilot has 2 options. They can guide the drone back to base so it can be reloaded and sent out on another mission, or if there's more targets to be destroyed, say a Russian warship, the Sea Drone itself can be rammed into it. The fuses on the front of the drone set off the explosives inside, hopefully sending the enemy ship to the bottom of the ocean. If we go back to the tape, then we can see all of that in action. Here's the drone carrier sailing into battle. If we pause for a moment, you can see the 3 impact fuses around the bow of the boat. On the horizon is the carrier's target, an oil rig off the coast of Crimea that is being used by the Russians to mount radar dishes and GPS jammers. The rig is already on fire, having been hit by another kamikaze sea drone earlier in the attack. Once the carrier gets within range, it launches its FPV drones. This is what the launch looks like from the aerial drone's point of view. If we pause the tape again, you can see a top-down view of the carrier. Here's the hangar which contains the FPV drones. You can see the protective doors have opened to allow the FPV to take off. You can also see the compartment we mentioned at the rear of the vessel, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. Once the FPVs are airborne, they begin circling the oil rig and picking their targets. These include a radar mast that the Russians have set up to spy on the Ukrainians, and what may be a GPS jammer to disrupt weapons that use GPS as guidance. We can also see that the boat drone backs into the oil rig at a couple of points. You can tell this is the rear of the boat because it's missing the bow and the impact fuses. While we can't be sure what the drone is doing at this point, it seems a fair guess that it's dropping explosive charges of some kind. These may be set to a timer, or to a depth, or remotely detonated. What is certain, that the tape then captures several large explosions that don't seem to be caused by an FPV drone. The boat drone itself is then driven into the rig. This time, you can see the contact fuses at the front. And here's the resulting explosion. Mission accomplished. The Russian radar stations are destroyed. So far, we believe Ukraine has carried out at least 9 attacks using these carrier drones. The first, which we just showed you, was on December the 7th, 2024. The next successful attack came in early January, when Ukraine claimed to have blown up 2 Pantsir anti-air systems. Another attack took place in early March, targeting yet more anti-air systems, Osa and Strela. All of those attacks were masterminded by the Ukrainian Navy. Then, on March the 19th, Ukrainian Special Forces revealed they had also been using carrier drones to attack Russian radar, anti-air systems, boats, and even a helicopter. They did not say exactly when the raids took place, but they claimed to have targeted or destroyed 24 targets, meaning at least 6 separate raids took place, 4 FPV drones on each raid. We also know at least one failed attack was launched on December the 30th, 2024, because the wreck of a carrier drone was filmed by the Russians. This is our only daylight look at the carrier drone, and while it is damaged, you can see most of the features we already pointed out in more detail. 2 significant things stand out about these attacks. First, they center around Crimea. This was seized by Russia in 2024 in a huge propaganda victory for Putin and is viewed as his center of gravity in Ukraine. If he was forced to give up the peninsula, Kiev calculates that would amount to total defeat for his war. Being able to strike Crimea, therefore, is very important to the Ukrainians. In the past, they've used long-range missiles such as their homemade Neptunes, British Storm Shadow, French Scalp, and American ATACMS to do this. But all of these weapons are expensive, difficult to make, and in short supply. Storm Shadow has been a rare sight on the peninsula since 2023, and ATACMS since summer 2024. Ukrainian Special Forces have also been used to attack the oil platforms and raid Crimea itself, once raising the Ukrainian flag over the peninsula. But these raids largely stopped after February 2024, when one of them went badly wrong. Ukraine's new drone carriers seem to put Crimea in the crosshairs once again. It isn't clear exactly how much one of these vessels costs, but since it can be reused, it's a fair bet that it's cheaper than long-range missiles. These typically cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for a one-way ticket. As far as we know, the drone carriers are also a domestic capability. Ukraine is responsible for making them, so there's no chance of the supply getting cut off. And since all the technology is remote controlled, it means Ukraine's valuable commandos don't have to risk their lives to carry out the strikes. Second, the attacks have largely targeted Russia's radar and anti-air systems. These are responsible for detecting and shooting down anything Ukraine fires at the peninsula, like the long-range rockets we just mentioned. In the past, when Ukraine has carried out extensive attacks on Crimea's air defenses, this has been followed by much larger strikes on the peninsula. It's not at all clear that that's what Kiev is planning this time around, but it does seem worth noting that the boat drone strikes are quite clearly focused on disabling Crimea's air defenses. If we take a look at this tape, we can see all of that in action. This is from the Ukrainian Special Forces, and it shows what they say are FPVs launched from boat drones attacking targets in Crimea. You can clearly see that most of those targets are radar dishes. These are the eyes of Crimea's air defenses. Without them, Russia's high-tech anti-air missiles can't see a thing. And what they can't see, they can't shoot. The missile launchers themselves are also targeted. This video appears to show an anti-air missile trying to target the incoming FPV drone, but the rocket veers off target and explodes before it reaches the drone. The drone pilot then bypasses the radar, which you can see here, and targets the launcher, which is here. Anti-air defenses make up a majority of the targets, but not all of them. You can also see tugboats being hit here and here. And even a helicopter, which is stationary on the ground, is targeted here. Ukraine may have started off as a war of trenches, massed artillery fires, and human wave assault tactics reminiscent of the First World War, but it is fast becoming a war of drones. And a picture is starting to emerge of what warfare might look like in the future. First came standalone drones, machines with a single capability deployed onto the battlefield to achieve a single effect. Whether that was dropping grenades on the enemy, delivering a precision blow to a tank, or sinking a Russian warship. These proved highly effective and convinced Ukraine to start a whole branch of the military dedicated just to drones. The Unmanned Systems Forces was created in February 2024 with the aim of innovating new drone types and tactics for the Ukrainian military. That innovation is now yielding a second phase of drone development, where different kinds of drones are being combined to produce a variety of effects. Carrier drones are the most obvious example. Sea drones alone can reach the Crimean coast easily enough, but are limited to attacking targets in the water with their impact explosives. That puts targets like radar and anti-air defenses out of reach. FPVs, meanwhile, can attack ground-based targets like radar and anti-air installations with ease. They're small and highly maneuverable, which makes them very hard for the missiles to shoot down. But their limitation is range. They cannot fly far enough to reach Crimea from territory that Ukraine controls. Combine the capabilities, however, and you get a seaborne craft that can effectively attack ground-based targets far from Ukrainian lines. Sea and air might be the most effective drone combination to date, but it is not the only one that Ukraine is trialling. Here's a Vampire heavy lifting drone, which is traditionally used to drop anti-tank mines on the Russians carrying a robot dog into battle. This could allow Ukrainians to carry out ground-based reconnaissance in difficult-to-reach locations. And this is a carrier drone, but airborne rather than seaborne, which can carry up to 6 FPV drones under its wings. It turns what was previously a reconnaissance drone into a potent attacking force. None of these other drone combinations have yet proved as successful as the Sea Carrier, but it shows a clear direction of travel for the Ukrainian military. And where the Ukrainian military leads, other militaries may well follow. The battlefields of the future could well belong to weapons such as these. But don't just take our word for it. We went to speak to an expert to find out more. First, I wanted to know, what exactly are these Ukrainian naval drone carriers and how do they work?
Ukraine has been using unmanned surface vessels, or USVs, as the general military term is. Ukraine started using them as one-way kamikaze craft against Russian maritime assets in port and at sea. And since then, since 2022, these USVs have evolved into multi-mission technologies that can conduct reconnaissance, they can conduct strike attacks, they can launch drones, and they can launch missiles and other types of weapons. And they've actually been quite effective.
How does this specific type of USV, the ones that carry FPV drones within them, work?
Well, we know that FPV drones generally do not go at very significant distances. Normally, if FPV drones are enabled by signal repeaters, they can actually fly much farther. And so a lot of carriers of FPVs, whether they're maritime carriers or aerial carriers, often function as signal repeaters themselves to enable these FPV-type drones, these strike UAVs, to operate at much longer distances. And Ukraine has already conducted multiple attacks from USVs to go after Russian assets at sea, in the Black Sea, radars, including air defense systems, and in some of the recent attacks, even a helicopter. It is difficult to defend against these type of USV and FPV combined attacks unless, of course, those type of maritime threats are tracked and ultimately interdicted. Because the Black Sea coast is fairly large, Ukraine can strike at different points and different locations in the Crimea itself against Russian military targets, as well as along the Black Sea coast. And of course, this is giving Russians very, very significant concern. Most Ukrainian USV boats are enabled by Starlink to enable these USVs to traverse fairly significant distances and maintain satellite communications.
With Western-supplied deep strike munitions running low, are these drones stepping in to fill that gap?
Ukraine has been using its long-range UAVs to strike at Russian targets in the Crimea for quite a while. Oftentimes, Ukrainian long-range UAV attacks are combined with unmanned surface vessel attacks to really kind of make it difficult for the Russian defenses to identify the exact and precise threats. In the recent attack, Russia scrambled several fighter jets, and 2 of them were actually shut down by Ukrainian USVs that had air-to-air missiles modified to shoot down these Russian threats. And so we've had the first instance of a maritime unmanned boat actually taken out, a fairly sophisticated jet fighter. Ukraine has modified initially a lot of commercial type UAVs, and so Ukraine today operates dozens of different types of long-range UAVs that can strike several hundred kilometers to more than 1,000 kilometers. So in the recent attack, many targets in Sevastopol were actually struck by Ukrainian UAV and USVs together. And Russian Navy is only now coming around to developing tactics and concepts to not just interdict these Ukrainian assets, but to also protect Russian surface and land-based assets in the Crimea and elsewhere in the Black Sea against these Ukrainian attacks. So this puts pressure on the Russian Navy to launch aerial assets, to activate shore-based assets, ship-based assets, to kind of have a lot of military assets in place to try to identify and interdict those Ukrainian USVs. And it's actually not as straightforward as it may look, as the even Russian video shows that multiple strikes miss Ukrainian boats until some of them are actually caught in this crossfire. And the most important element here is that Ukraine is not using its own sailors. Ukraine is using remote control tactics, and this forces Russians to actually use a lot of manned assets, and this puts sailors and aircraft pilots in danger.
Ukraine has become known as the war of drones. I wanted to know how drones are shaping this conflict.
Ukrainian and Russian use of multiple types of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and combat UAVs basically fill the air with different types of UAVs flying at different altitudes. Tanks, vehicles, cars, units of soldiers, individual soldiers can be identified by drones, can be tracked by those UAVs, and ultimately attacked by those UAVs, especially FPV drones. As we hear now from the battlefield, even small UAV units that have just a few dozen drones can hold off much larger advancing and attacking adversary units. Because of so many reconnaissance and intelligence assets in the air, either side can actually see what is happening, not just on their side, but on the adversarial side. Over the past 6 or so months, Ukrainians have gotten very successful in taking out Russian ISR drones. Russians are now becoming more successful in targeting Ukrainian nighttime bomber drones, and so on and so forth. So this technology race is enabled by the fact that there are lots and lots of UAVs that are available. And of course, these type of tactical drones do not replace artillery. And parts of the battlefield where artillery is not effective, or where it is simply not available, or where artillery shells are not available, UAVs can actually fill the gap up to a certain point.
How is Russia responding? Are they developing their own USVs?
They're actually developing, I think, at least half a dozen USV designs, which are greatly influenced by the ones that were fielded by Ukraine early on. Prior to 2022, Russian Navy actually conducted multiple experiments and developments with different types of USVs, but those were very, very limited in scale and really were not promulgated across the Russian Navy and Russian fleets. There's a lot of internalizing of Ukrainian successes right now. We haven't seen Russia field these USVs in direct combat. Right now, Russia is basically on the receiving end of multiple types of Ukrainian USV attacks. But again, Russians are monitoring that battle space. They are analyzing what Ukraine has done. They're using captured Ukrainian USVs to develop their own, and it is likely that this year they will start fielding their own types of USVs for different mission requirements.
Finally, are these drone carriers a game changer?
We know at this point that Houthis based in Yemen have used different USV types against some of the Western and American naval assets in the Red Sea. We know that Houthis have used UAVs as well. And ultimately, the technology used in Ukraine by both combatants is spreading around the world. A lot of the information about how to build those systems, how to use those systems in different environments is publicly available. Unmanned surface vehicles per se are not specifically a new development to the Ukraine war. Those types of USVs were developed earlier by other belligerents prior to 2022. So it is likely that some of the lessons and technologies used in Ukraine can actually be fielded by other forces, other militaries, state and non-state actors, and even empowered individuals. Obviously, not every conflict around the world is going to look and mirror image the conflict that's happening in Ukraine, but a lot of tactics and a lot of similar sort of concepts used in Ukraine may be utilized elsewhere. Major militaries around the world, major military actors must be prepared to encounter some form of a UAV or a USV threat that we're witnessing right now in Ukraine combat.
What we're looking at here is a robotic dog on the battlefields of Ukraine. This could be a scene straight out of science fiction, but is the new reality of war as robots join humans on the front lines in ever-increasing numbers. With its trenches, no man's lands and artillery barrages, Ukraine in some way resembles wars from 100 years ago. But in other ways, it looks unlike any war ever fought before. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the use of robots. So what exactly is a robot dog doing on the front lines? What does that tell us about how war is being fought right now? And is this what every war will look like in the future? We're going to examine this tape, break down how this robot works, and speak to a man who has seen them operate in the field to find out. Meet Robo-dog. There's a few different versions in use in Ukraine, but this one is based on the Chinese Unitary 02, which is the same as the one you just saw in that tape. It's got 4 legs, each controlled by its own motor with pressure sensors in the paws. These limbs are powered by a computer brain that was trained using artificial intelligence. What that means is it's very skilled at walking. It can hop, skip, dance, and stand on its hind legs if you really want it to. But it also has practical skills, like climbing over obstacles, lying down, and jumping, which are much more useful on a battlefield. This dog can run at up to 10 miles an hour, helping it to evade enemies. The main body of the dog houses the battery, which powers the robot, giving it up to 4 hours of life before it needs to be recharged. There's a retractable strap which can secure an object to the dog's back, and it can comfortably lift 8 kilos, though that can be increased to 12 kilos in a pinch. When it's not carrying cargo, a robotic arm can also be fitted to the top of the dog, allowing it to lift and move objects. Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and 4G transmitters inside the body allow the dog to be controlled remotely. There's also a built-in intercom system, meaning the dog's controller can speak to anyone nearby, and they can speak back. Up here in the head are a bunch of sensors, cameras, and lights, which allow the robot and its controller to sense their surroundings. The large spinning semicircle on its chin is a LiDAR, or laser radar, which allows the robot to accurately map its surroundings. This gives the robot's controller an incredibly detailed map of anything the dog can see and helps the robot automatically avoid obstacles. In a controlled environment like a house, this would also allow the dog to take itself for a walk, following instructions from the owner. However, in an ever-changing environment like a battlefield, this feature is less useful. At the top is an HD camera, which allows whoever is controlling the dog to remotely see where they're going using an app. This is the primary way the dog finds its way around. And between the camera and the LiDAR is a torch, which can be turned on and off remotely to allow the dog's controller to see better. The dog weighs about 33 pounds, stands about 40 centimeters tall, and purchased off the shelf costs about $3,000, making it pretty cheap. If we go back to the tape, we can see all of that in action. This is the Cartier Brigade, also known as the Billionaires Brigade. It is one of Ukraine's most advanced units and is becoming famous for its use of robots. One of those is the Unitary 02 model, which is being trained for combat missions. Here, you can see the dog activate and the LiDAR starts spinning. Here's the cameras and torch, which allow the robot's controller to see what it's seeing. And here's what the world looks like from the dog's point of view. You can see how it uses its AI-powered brain to negotiate the rough terrain, and the various tricks it can do, like standing on its hind legs, jumping, and rolling over. You can also see the Ukrainians have covered theirs in camouflage paint. As well as disguising the dog to the naked eye, this paint job may well include material that is designed to reflect infrared cameras, making it harder for drones to spot. All of which is fascinating and kind of creepy. But what use is that in battle? Ukraine is currently locked into a war of attrition against its much bigger neighbor, and the winner will be whichever country can exhaust the other's resources first. One of the most important resources is manpower, and Ukraine, as with most things, is suffering a chronic shortage of it. Preserving the lives of its soldiers is therefore paramount, and Kiev's generals are willing to consider any solution that keeps them out of harm's way. And that's where the robots come in. Robo-dog's primary role is reconnaissance. In war, soldiers need continuous real-time information about where their enemies are and what they're doing, or else they risk being caught by surprise and killed. In the wars of the past, armies had to use human scouts to gather that intelligence. That meant putting someone in harm's way, and whether they were on foot, in a vehicle, or in the skies, there was a chance they'd be killed. The first attempt to solve this problem was with satellites, because they're unmanned and too far away to shoot with all but the most sophisticated of missiles. But they have some crucial drawbacks. They're expensive to build and launch, meaning they're only available to a handful of countries. Unless they're equipped with infrared cameras, they can be blocked by clouds, trees, or anything else that obscures their vision, and even very sophisticated satellite networks that have appeared in recent years only update their images every 6 hours or so. An age of time on the battlefield. Ukraine's answer to this problem has been drones, which are now a permanent feature in the skies over the battlefields. It is thought that several thousand of them are in the air at any one time, feeding a constant stream of information back to command posts so leaders can make life or death decisions. But, just like satellites, these aren't foolproof. They struggle to fly in high winds, could be jammed using electronic warfare, and could also be blinded by clouds or tree cover. If the thing they're trying to spy on can't be seen from the air, then the drone is of no use. That's where alternatives like Robo-dog come in. Being close to the ground, the dog can see a lot that the drones can't. Minefields and tripwires, for instance, that might prove lethal to soldiers if they were to walk into them unawares. They can also navigate dense urban environments where aerial drones would struggle to maneuver. Fighting in close quarters like this is lethal. In every building and around every corner could be an enemy. In the wars of the past, the only way to find these enemies was for soldiers to poke their heads around those corners and into those buildings, risking getting it shot off. But not anymore. Robot dogs can be sent to check for danger without risking anyone's life. That's not just the case in buildings, but also in tree lines, which is where the Ukrainians and Russians both tend to dig their trenches. Assaulting trenches is deadly work, unless, of course, you have a ground drone that can scout out the trench network first. The robo-dogs can also perform other roles, like resupply. Suppose you're attacking a building or a tree-lined trench, but get into trouble. You've run out of ammo or have to deal with a casualty. At the moment, this means sending more soldiers into the fight to bring up extra ammunition and medical supplies, putting them in danger. But drones like Robo-dog can carry enough weight to bring the supplies instead. This job can't be done by aerial drones because these can carry just a few kilos at a time. If we take a look at some additional battlefield footage, you can see that's exactly what the Ukrainians are training the dog drones to do. Here's Curtin Company, a unit with Ukraine's 28th Brigade, using a robot dog to help them scout out an urban environment. The soldiers are able to stick to cover up against the side of buildings or underneath trees, while the dog is sent out into the open spaces between the buildings where the soldiers might get shot to scout out enemy positions. Photos from the same training exercise show it was also being taught how to scout out buildings alongside the troops. Curtin Company also trained their robo-dog to navigate a wooded environment, such as a Russian tree line. The robot handles this less well, but is still good enough to potentially save the life of its master. These images show they also tested the dog drone's carrying capacity, loading it up with medical supplies to carry up to the front line. And this video shows a terrifying vision of what war might look like if the dogs are trained to attack rather than defend. Someone has fitted a flamethrower to the back of the dog, where the robotic arm mount usually goes, turning the machine into a potentially lethal killer. There's no evidence that robot attack dogs have been used on the battlefield yet. But we do know that both the Chinese and the Russians have investigated the possibility of mounting rocket launchers and machine guns to these machines. Which begs the question, are we heading for a future where robots fight alongside humans? In one sense, we're already living in that reality. The longer the war in Ukraine drags on, the more common drones and other robots are becoming on the battlefield. First came the aerial drones, used for scouting and dropping explosives on the enemy. At the start of the war, these were rare, but now they're everywhere. Then came the FPVs, a kamikaze adaptation of this technology, which have become the go-to weapon for precision strikes on Russian tanks. These drones regularly fight alongside human soldiers. The standard defense against the Russian attack these days is to hit it with FPVs before it even reaches Ukrainian lines. Only then do the humans enter the fight, battling whatever is left of the Russian assault. before grenade-dropping drones are dispatched to finish off any survivors. The FPVs were also adapted for use at sea, where they completely replaced manned warships. Drones like the Magura 5 and Sea Baby sank or damaged at least 8 Russian vessels, all without a single sailor being deployed into the field. The next innovation is ground drones, like Robo-dog and these other, slightly less sophisticated models being used by the Cartier Brigade. These robots are armed with grenade launchers, machine guns, landmines, and other explosives, and their intent is to replace humans. The technology is trickier to master because it's harder for robots to navigate uneven ground than it is for them to fly or sail, but they've met with some success. Late last year, Cartier claimed to have carried out the world's first robot-only attack on a Russian position. 50 robots took part in the attack. Ground drones packed with explosives and topped with machine guns, FPVs, and aerial drones watching the whole thing unfold. Over the course of 5 hours, they attacked and destroyed a Russian position near the town of Lipsy, which was later taken by the Ukrainians. That's quite an achievement. Other Ukrainian units are now said to be preparing versions of the same mission, suggesting this kind of combat is about to become a lot more common. But this is still humans fighting other humans. All of these drones are being controlled by people who are making the decisions about where to go and what to attack. The step beyond that is to allow the robots to do the fighting themselves. That may sound far-fetched, but it's something Ukraine is already working on. This video shows an artificial intelligence being used to determine targets for an FPV drone to attack, and similar tests have been run on a machine gun drone as well. It's terrifying to think about, but robots which can think for themselves are probably not all that far away from being deployed in battle, which means there's a plausible future emerging in which attack dogs like this are unleashed. Wars that once seemed like a far-off fantasy may actually be very close at hand. Next, we spoke to a journalist who spent time with the Cartier Brigade and saw Robo-dog in action.
I'm Richard Pendlebury, and I'm the reporter for the Mail's Ukraine Frontline films.
What can you tell us about Robo-dog?
It's very dystopian. The Robo-dog, it's a quadruped. It's not Ukrainian developed. It's from a Chinese firm called Unitree, and it's called I think it's called the Go-To. And you can get them off the shelf for just a little over £2,000, $2,500. And it was developed really as a recreational, fun thing. But you can see that it might have other functions or purposes. What makes the Robo-dog different, apart from being very strange and dystopian and looking like a sci-fi dog, is that it does have a built-in camera in what looks like its head. So obviously it could be, and they have been using it as a frontline reconnaissance drone. They're able to do things that would normally involve putting a soldier, a human being, in grave jeopardy. £2,000 drone, it might sound a lot. It's not compared to the cost of some of the aerial drones and all the other kit that they're using. If they can get it into a Russian frontline position, and it's feeding live video footage of the position back to its pilot, and it can do some of them. The drone that I was with had apparently been on several combat missions. It wasn't just a one-way trip for these dogs. They do come back. But as I said, it's not perfect. It wasn't designed for the military. That said, apparently the US Marine Corps and the Chinese Army have both tested it, an armed version of Robo-dog. One is with an assault rifle, and the other one had some kind of anti-tank rocket. So the next step after that will be a totally AI. And then it becomes really kind of Blade Runner, totally dystopian and quite scary.
I know the Ukrainians are working on AI with their aerial drones. Can you tell us anything about the kind of way that Ukraine is thinking about AI and trying to integrate it?
Initially, it's teaching the drone to recognize shapes. The drone pilot would be on a long-range reconnaissance, would be having to stare at the screen for hours. Well, not hours, but you would need a whole rotation of people, and there's human failing. You get tired, you miss stuff, but a really good pilot will know what kind of shapes, camouflage shapes, things that he's looking for in a bush. That's a tank or something. You can teach that through AI to the drone, and the drone never gets tired. I mean, it's artificial intelligence doesn't get tired, and it could fly for 24 hours and just keep recognizing hidden objects or vehicles, stuff like that. That is how the aerial drone AI was progressing when I was talking with the guys. You can also train them to hunt live soldiers, which is when it becomes
Really dystopian.
Really dystopian. But I'm sure that will happen.
And then there's obviously the potential to plug that kind of hunter-killer AI into a robot dog.
Oh, undoubtedly. Yeah. I mean, if they continue with I think it's a trial. I think it's not an experiment. They're trialing it, they're using it. But if they feel it's worth carrying on, yeah, of course, that's the next step. And the technology in this war in particular is just like bounding on. It's so fast. I mean, the Second World War, the way everything sped up was amazing. But I think we're seeing similar things in Ukraine, where everything it's being tested on the battlefield as it comes.
What can you tell us about the brigade? What it's like, who's in it, how it operates, how it came to be?
Well, Hartier Brigade, as its name suggests, it's from the Kharkiv Oblast, from the city. And they didn't exist before the full-scale invasion. They were formed initially as a battalion, and they were funded by an agro-billionaire, a local guy, very, very rich. And they earned the nickname the Billionaires Battalion. And they are still part of the Ukrainian National Guard, so it's kind of like a reservist thing. But right from the get-go, they wanted to be super professional.
What can you tell us about how the kind of tactics they're using and the kind of technologies they're employing?
Their precepts they're very much based on the NATO model. It's not so rigid as the old Soviet doctrine, which was followed by a lot of the Ukrainian units, to be honest, and obviously still is by the Russian army. So there is a lot of prep on operations, either defensive or offensive, a lot of prep. They will start on a large scale where there'll be maps. They'll do a bigger map like a sand pit. They'll walk their officers and NCOs through it. Then before the operation starts, there will be a full-scale dress rehearsal where the troops, the vehicles will go through it, and only then, once they're satisfied, will an operation be launched. Now, Hartier have kind of grasped this evolving technology like no other brigade, I think. Partly because they are quite a young brigade. If you think that the average combat age of a Ukrainian army soldier is 43, which is incredibly high. The average age of a soldier in the Hartier Brigade is around about 31, they tell me. And so Hartier have really got it that the Gen Z are the people who best understand this evolving robot technology, and they are using them as the leaders in that particular sector. The ground drones they're developing, and most of the drones they're using are Ukrainian designed. They're then given to Hartier, and then Hartier, the special unit there, then develops them further for their own military purposes. A lot of them are like radio-controlled chariots. So they're moving stuff. It might be quite boring, but some of them they vary in size from very small to the size of a small cart in environments where a vehicle or a human in a vehicle would be under tremendous degree of threat. You lose a ground drone to a drone strike or an artillery strike, it's annoying, but it's not fatal. And those are sort of the logistics side of it, which is so important on the battlefield. Getting the supplies, the ammunition, the medicine, everything to the guys in the front line is becoming more and more difficult. And these ground drones, particularly the ones that are just shifting stuff, are incredibly important. The smaller ones can be adapted also as a sort of ground suicide drone. They can be, and we're talking robots that are just this big, and are pretty good over rough ground, radio controlled, and they can be rigged up with explosives, and they can be just driven at the Russian positions.
That's where this tape stops, but we'll be back soon to play you through another episode of War on Tape. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you want more videos like this in your feed, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.